everybody. Welcome back to the Oneway podcast. My name is Master Veitch. I am joined here with
Christy
and
Johnny.
And we are up here at the Oneway Retreat up in Vermont in July 2026. Today we are discussing all about crossing barriers of cross-training and essentially going to discuss the pros and cons, or the benefits versus potential issues you can have with cross-training in your martial arts. So we'll start it off with the benefits of cross-training because that's what everybody wants to know about mostly, and then we can get into why that might not be a great idea, and you're going to see that it could be totally dependent on who you're talking to as to whether or not this information is applicable to you. So for reference, I've been doing martial arts for 25 years. Johnny, how long have you been doing martial arts?
At least 6 or so.
All right. And how about you, Christy?
Not 5.
5 years. Great. Different styles. So Johnny is one of my direct students, whereas Christy is a student of Grandmaster Olds and another faction. So we all come from different backgrounds and different styles, different kinds of teachers. My teacher is somebody who taught a specific way, and I had to learn a specific way, whereas Johnny has to learn from me, where I teach a different way, and he has to learn a special way. And then Christy learns from somebody totally different. So you have lots of different viewpoints from here. Is that kind of correct?
Absolutely.
I would say, right?
Yeah.
All right, so starting with me, I've been around the block a few times, and I've cross-trained with many different kinds of teachers across the world, technically, but mostly in the United States. And anytime I kind of go on vacation, I try to pick up a dojo somewhere and say, hey, can I train? Just do a drop-in and try to train in. Usually, I try to train in something that is a different martial art than I regularly practice, such as maybe like Wing Chun or some sort of Kung Fu, or some offset of Jiu-Jitsu or what have you. Maybe an official judo school or a sports school, something that I don't typically train in. As far as cross-training for me goes, I try to just dabble in as much as possible, and I feel like it's benefited myself as well as the martial arts that I study. I've been able to apply and adapt and modify my techniques and my understanding accordingly by learning from these other teachers. And that cross-training even extends to online learning as well, which we can dive into a little bit later. Johnny, have you cross-trained at all with any other teachers besides me? Careful.
I have, absolutely. I actually initially started my martial arts journey in something totally different than what I do now. It was a pretty standard karate style, and it wasn't really feeling it, and I didn't necessarily feel good flowing with it, and I was just kind of looking around, and then I ended up finding Master Veitch's dojo, and I was curious to find a martial art that suited me, and I didn't know what that was. And as soon as I found Aikido, that was 100% my fit, and that was a total relearning. The karate style has very certain ways they chamber, hold their fists, and then when I came to Aikido, it's like turning everything upside down. And also at that dojo, we do a style of Kempo, which is vastly different striking and blocking in terms of forms and how you would throw a punch or throw a block or chamber, don't chamber, different things like that. So it was definitely a wake-up call at first, but then once I got comfortable and took a little bit, I adapted to that new style and kind of almost forgot about that. And it wasn't until then, as we started studying the Japanese jiu-jitsu that we do there and seeing how they all start to incorporate with each other, essentially being under the same system but still going down little, call it rabbit holes for each specific art, you really start to see the connection and how they can benefit each other. When you're kind of focused on one and then you bring it to another style, you can say, oh, I move this way, I had this technique, and it is totally applicable here. If anything, it could enhance it sometimes. So yeah, it was cool to start to get an idea of things. And then obviously now getting instruction from Grandmaster Olds and experiencing their style, which is absolutely totally different than anything I've ever experienced. Um, Instead of deconstructing what I do and how I practice, it just enhances. It helps me hone. Oh, maybe I should make my hips face this way when I'm doing this kick in my style, or maybe I should bring my elbows up a little bit differently when I'm doing it this way. And you can kind of mash them together.
So you mean like modifying techniques based on what you're learning?
Yeah,
by a different teacher.
Even enhancing, or maybe just changing it up just a little bit. Variances. You don't always have to do one technique one certain way. There's very variable, different ways to do all these different techniques when you have these different exposures to different styles.
Good. Christy, how have you viewed cross-training, and do you cross-train?
Yes,
regularly?
I do. Train with Grandmaster Olds in the Oneway system, which already incorporates multiple martial arts within it. And then I also separately train at a BJJ and Muay Thai gym. My background is yoga. I've done yoga for 25 years, and yoga doesn't have cross-training per se, but it's very different in that you're not at a dojo with one teacher, right? You're going to a studio or multiple studios and taking classes from as many teachers as you can. And you take things from each teacher. A teacher will explain something some way, and it'll help a pose click for you in a way that it never did before. When I started teaching yoga myself about 10 years ago, I found that even more powerful, because as a teacher, you're picking up things, cues, or different ways of explaining alignment from different teachers all the time. Then you're able to incorporate that into your own teaching. So the idea of cross-training was very natural to me, because of course you would want to have exposure to as many teachers as possible, just because their way of explaining or their way of teaching might just vibe with you in a way that helps you to understand further. So when I started training with Grandmaster Olds, in one way we do striking and traditional Taekwondo forms or katas. And then we also do some grappling, and we also do some takedowns and techniques that were a little more foreign to me. I had a lot of exposure to Taekwondo as a kid because my dad trained and taught Taekwondo. So I was really familiar with forms and striking. Groundwork I was not familiar with really at all. And so I felt that even though we get a good general overview of that in our Oneway training, I wanted to learn more about it specifically. And so I found a BJJ gym that I liked, found a professor whose explanations and way of teaching really broke down the techniques for me and made them really accessible. I also really like the cross training that I do there, because they have women's only classes. And while I'm comfortable training with men, there's a different energy in women's only offerings. They also have like women's self-defense classes, which kind of take the same techniques but really tailor them for self-defense for women in scary situations. And that's been a powerful part of my training as well. And then Muay Thai, it's a different level, a different type of striking, but I find that it's definitely made me more confident in my sparring in the Oneway hybrid sparring system. So all around, I think the main benefits that I find from cross-training are exposure to different explanations and viewpoints on techniques, and just gaining confidence because you're getting more well-rounded instruction from multiple avenues.
Thanks. Yeah, I have some follow-up questions for you regarding that, but we will get there. Some of the best things about cross-training is when you understand something, and then you work with somebody who doesn't do your style or go to your school or learns under somebody else or whatever. They tend to have a potentially different method of performing the same technique. So, I'm working with Master Aaronstein up here at the retreat, just on our own, and he has a different background than I do, and somewhat, but some of his technique names were just slightly different than ours, but also even just the way that some of his techniques were performed were slightly different. So from each other, we can learn that I can modify a technique or he can modify a technique and still the same technique, same concept, same principle, but we are learning to do it slightly different. And one of the biggest benefits, I think, is learning a technique, and then your teacher might only know one or two or three ways to do this technique, and then that fourth way or fifth way is going to be from somebody else, just because nobody knows everything. That's why eventually at some point in time, having more than one teacher or cross training, reaching out and finding new information elsewhere is actually vital to a consistent or very integrity based martial arts career. When you kind of sit back and just go to one teacher only forever, you're actually doing yourself a disservice, because your teacher doesn't know everything. They might be good, they might know a ton, they might be great at competition, they might do this and do that, but no one teacher is going to be just all powerful, all knowing. And so you have to reach out there and go to other people. Plus, it's great to just meet other people and just get involved. And that's the one thing about Oneway that's actually really, really good. Considering how the martial arts community is everybody's welcome, but everybody needs to also have a open mindset to receiving new information, whether or not they think it's going to be relevant, and to practice stuff that they don't probably want to practice, so just being open to receiving that information from somebody else who you probably don't even know, even if it's something that you've known before and you've maybe even developed on your own, having somebody else do it and you doing it the way they do it, you might learn something. And if you don't, that's okay too. But that's the point of cross training, is to take advantage of that opportunity, that potential that is there to learn a new way. There's a couple techniques that I've done a million times, but you take a seminar, you go to a retreat or something, and boom, there you go. You learn how to do it just slightly different, just so you can have fun with it. Doesn't matter if it's practical or not. Just, hey, that's a new way to do it. I would love to work on that more. So that's exciting, especially when you've been doing this a long time and you've seen almost everything. You're kind of like, I need something new and fresh. And when you see it, you're just like, finally, But you can't do that if you're not cross training, or if your teacher's not cross training. Yeah. Okay, somebody's got to be cross training to get this new information. All right, so you have a direct.
So something I just thought was really kind of stand out. You mentioned when you understand a technique, or when you know something already. Like, I think it's kind of important to say, we're not saying like, this isn't like a list of like moves you're getting. If you're not cross training to say, I can do BJJ and I can do Muay Thai and I can also do Jiu-Jitsu, like that's not the intention for cross training. It's not like an accolades list. It's I understand this and I want to understand other martial arts. I want to understand other styles, other techniques, other approaches, other mindsets on top of it, like in supplementation, like in addition to what you're already doing.
Sure.
It's not a running list of, I've done 12 martial arts and I have 4 belts. Like,
right,
that's because
Well, I mean, I would definitely challenge that just a little bit in saying that is the accolades of some people. All they want to do is have the laundry list of, hey, I do this, but I also do this.
Which is fair.
I see it, and I see it all the time. I see like most BJJ gyms, most teachers in that space only know BJJ, and maybe they know one or two things. And there's some teachers out there that have other martial arts under their belts, which is great. But for a majority of them, they do BJJ or sport jiu-jitsu or something like that, and they don't know real judo. They barely know wrestling. They don't know any stand-ups, no boxing, no nothing. And then they usually bring in somebody who does like something popular like boxing or Muay Thai, right? And then they dabble with that and they say, I train Muay Thai. It's like, no, you don't. You train once a month when the guy comes in and you have a minute. You don't train Muay Thai. All right. If you train Muay Thai, you'd be there every Tuesday night, right, for yourself, and you'd go and you would learn as a white belt or as a beginner, and you would work your way up in your understanding or your skill level or your rank or whatever it is. So unless you're immersing yourself inside of the martial art, you're just dabbling. But that's okay. It's okay to dabble. But to your point, like the main point should be, if you're going to cross train on a consistent basis, make it consistent and be regular, and actually try to engage with that so that you can cross train properly. So along with that, I'll talk to you guys about, or I'd like to ask you about the timing of training. When do you think it's appropriate to cross train? So for example, you sign up for a school, right? You never done martial arts before. You sign up for a Taekwondo school, but you know what? Grappling looks great. And I've had some exposure to it. It looks fun. When do we go from Taekwondo school and then go to the BJJ school? When you're learning certain kinds of things there. What do you think, Christy? Because that kind of applies to you directly. When do you think is a great time to do that, and why? And I can give my feedback as well.
Well, obviously, if you just try to jump in, especially if you're talking about going to like multiple disciplines at multiple schools, you're just going to water down your own experience. You're just going to try to do too much too fast. So I would definitely say, I don't have some time frame specifically in mind, but you need to be rooted in at least one martial art or one martial art school and have a good foundation and actually understand what you're doing there, right? Like, everyone's journey through rank is different. So you could be a white belt at some gym or dojo for years, or you could advance quickly and have a colored belt within a year. So I don't even want to tie it to rank necessarily, but I would say maybe after white belt, just as a general rule, right? Because once you progress from white belt, that kind of means that at our school at Oneway, once you get to yellow, which is the second rank, that's when you're a real student of the school. White belts are almost like trying it out, they're guests of the school.
It's like a long-term trial.
Right.
I agree.
Yeah,
Most people will drop out before they even reach a belt, right? So I think you're right about that. And the foundation is really important, of course. Now, BJJ and Taekwondo are completely separate martial arts. They almost, while a lot of martial arts have things in common, they're almost, you have almost completely grappling versus almost completely blocking and striking. So they're complementary, but they're not really the same at all. In those instances, it's kind of like you could do both at once. The problem is, like you said, it's easy to become overwhelmed, and you're probably just going to gravitate towards the place you tend to fit in or like the most in general, and then the other one will go by the wayside, and you might even get a bad taste in your mouth for the other place without even them doing anything wrong.
Well, because as a beginner, when you're trying to take in all of that information and assimilate it and figure out where you fit in that family at that or the people who are training with you at that dojo or at that gym, I feel like that's already just a lot to process and deal with. So if you're, and also just integrating it into your schedule. So like if you wanted to go on Tuesdays and Thursdays to classes at this dojo, and then you're trying to also go to this other one on Mondays and Wednesdays, you're just going to overwhelm yourself, and that's when people just burn out.
Yeah, I agree. And then a lot of people do burn out. They do too much too quick.
And they don't like the martial art because of it.
Yeah, and then they kind of badmouth it, whatever it is. But yeah, there's a huge turnover in martial arts. But aside from that, I would just add that your timing of cross training is important, and you have to learn to become a student first. Once you learn how to just become a student and just dedicate yourself to either school, it doesn't really matter. And then you're like, you know what, I also want to do this, but I like it here. Then do both. Pay 2 tuitions, do this, or whatever you want. But just make sure that you make the time for learning the fundamentals of whichever one you want to prioritize, and then kind of move on. So, especially if they're similar arts. So if you were going to do, like, let's say, I study Kempo, which is striking, it's karate essentially, and then you have Taekwondo, which is more of the same also, or Tang Soo Do. but just the stylistic differences, right? Maybe one thing wrong, maybe they do a block different, or this or that and the other thing. Wing Chun, anything that's blocking and striking. You definitely want to pick anyone, get your foundation, and when you have a solid foundation, you're like, okay, this is the idea. Now you can go out and say, oh, well, this is how the karate guys do it. Ah, okay. Now let me modify my technique because I like that, or I find it to be better, or it works more, or it just flows better. Now, like myself, I've taken my traditional Kempo karate experience, and through supplemental trainings and dabbling and what have you, I've learned to acquire other kinds of tactics or techniques or ideas or concepts that I can incorporate in my everyday Kempo, without changing the overall concept or idea of Kempo itself. So, do we think that you could learn faster by cross training?
If it's going to be one of those situations where you're already established in a martial art, like we were talking about, you have a foundation.
Let's assume we're doing I'm doing BJJ at this school, and then I want to go to this other BJJ school because my friend goes there, right? But this one's closer. So I go to this one once a week, but I go to my home dojo twice a week, right? Mm-hmm. Right? What it is,
I was gonna say some of that is also dictated by intention and why you're training. If you're one of these people that wants the accolades, that wants to have a little bit of taste of every martial art that they can get their hands on in the area, then absolutely check that other BJJ's place out. Go check out the Wing Chun place. If you want to supplement and add to what you already have, I think if you find a complementary dojo or gym and you have the ability to go, I think you could, check it out right away.
Yeah.
Again, if you already have that kind of set foundation on something, I don't think it's the intention and why you're doing it. So if you really just want to learn, hey, you know what, I'm kind of sick of punching and kicking in this Kempo style, and these guys do it, but it's a little bit different, I'm going to check it out. I think if you're feeling maybe antsy or plateaued, it's maybe a good indicator to sometimes even look a little bit and see if something strikes the interest.
Yeah. I definitely look for nuances in technique. Like I said, because it's like there comes a point where you know a lot, right? And I definitely don't know everything. I haven't seen everything, but I'm always looking at other masters or other teachers, and I say, what are they doing different that I could do that could make my strike more effective, or my maneuver more effective, or technique, or whatever. What's something that can be pointed out to me that can benefit my overall style? And I'm always looking for those really, really small details that probably get glazed over by most people, especially like a beginner. So
I think that sometimes can be lent to perspective, because if you're locked into, let's just say, Aikido type of mindset, which is a very grappling, flowy, big movement, and then you're going to be going into, I know things like Hapkido or similar, maybe another branching off style, you might experience something, the same move, the same technique, the same way, but the perspective is different. So maybe it's self-defense oriented, maybe it's combative, maybe it's sport. You're going to see a different angle that you didn't see. And I can think of specific examples where I was, you basically get locked into these principles where you keep your elbows in or you do certain things like that. And I was exposed to something that was the opposite of what I normally would do. And I was, in a sense, perplexed, like, why would you do that? You keep your elbows in or whatever it is. But then it turns out there was this whole other level that was exposed that I wasn't thinking of, clearly because I didn't have that perspective. I didn't have that thought to think of it from that viewpoint. Like, oh, well, yeah, now it makes total sense. Why would I keep my elbow? And I have nothing, you see the relative way it works with your art then, and then you can explore that. Oh, here's that situation. Well, my elbows are normally in. Now I'm going to flare them out and see how it helped me. And you can, adapt it then. And that's when we add to what we have.
Nice.
Yes, and I think that it also helps you to ask intelligent questions about techniques and about how to apply them in your training, right? I think that, going back to something I said earlier, different teachers explain things different ways. It could be the exact same technique, but they might but one teacher might say something in a way that just makes it click for you, or that makes you ask a question, like Johnny was just saying, like, why would I do it that way? And then just staying curious and having that type of thoughtful approach to training, I think, yes, that can help you develop faster,
Right.
and learn faster and learn better, for lack of a better word.
Be stronger, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a experience I had, particularly where I went to a BJJ seminar held by Shujitsu, and the guy out of Kentucky. Anyways, he was up near me, and he had done this seminar all about the Kimura, and it's like, okay, well, I know how to do the Kimura, right? But then it's like, obviously, it's like, I went in with a completely open mind, because I'm just there for fun. I'm there to learn and meet him and just roll a little bit or whatever. But I learned some valuable things just from that, and again, if you're learning from somebody different, then you got to pay attention, because you're going to miss something.
Mm-hmm.
And if I had went in there with that mentality of, oh, he's just going to go over the Kimura, what the hell, why not something cool and fantastic? Well, that's because he's showing you how to achieve the Kimura with more success, because that's what he beats a lot of people with, especially the teacher of that school, which is why he was there to begin with, to teach how he beat him, And so we learn things that would benefit us, and you can incorporate into all your other techniques, right? So we talk about supplementation and complementary martial arts. So, martial arts will complement each other if you approach it right. So, you have 3 different grappling styles, right? You can learn Aikido, you can learn Jiu-Jitsu, like Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, you can learn Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you can learn Kung Fu, or anything that has grappling in it whatsoever. And looking at the similarities of those will show that they complement each other way more, And again, what you're looking for are those little nuanced techniques that are, I've done techniques just like this in like 3 variations, but that's all I've ever practiced. And then I do this one tiny extra variation that I learned. Now I just added one to my repertoire, and I can just pretend like I made it up, right? Yeah, but that's what you need to look for when you're going to be cross-training is, if you understand something, you have a foundation, look at what other people are doing different, because that's crucial to the point of cross-training. Okay, we were talking about intent before, right? Do you have anything to add, John?
Yeah, well, actually, you were joking about that, and you said, oh, I could just pretend it's mine. Well, that brings up a good point of if, for instance, you're already teaching, you've been teaching for a long time, somebody like myself is dipping into teaching. I'm starting to, in that sense of, learning how to teach, but also learning how to work with other teachers and stuff like that too. But when you cross-train and you expand and go beyond your gym or dojo and you expand your techniques, you can help and teach other people a little bit better, a little bit more, maybe with more assertiveness, or you have a little bit more information that maybe you wouldn't have had. Oh, you know what? Here's another way to do that elbow, or something else that just you're going to be able to help and pass on.
Right. So, what do you guys think constitutes cross-training definitionally? Is it the martial art, or do you think it's the teacher, or both?
I think I'm going to go back to, and I jumped in there, sorry, but I think it's going to be the intention and the approach, because I think also what we failed to mention so far is it doesn't have to be martial arts within martial arts. You can do martial arts, let's just say you're training specifically Aikido or karate, whatever it is, and you're only studying one art and you're not exploring other martial arts. You can be studying Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, let's say something like Kempo, which is a striking and blocking art. If you're studying just Kempo and no other martial art, you can still train marksmanship with guns, and that's going to help you. You can train, maybe you do skiing, right? Maybe you do a baseball, hand-eye coordination, anything that you're supplementing into your activities of your hand-eye coordination. Obviously, as practitioners who want to better themselves, they usually bring martial arts out into the world. But
so are you saying if somebody plays basketball, that can supplement your that could be considered cross training for your martial arts?
Yeah, I mean, you're doing endurance, and you're working on your breath. That's a high paced game. You're constantly running. So somebody who does jujitsu, obviously you're rolling around for a long time. You need all the endurance and breath work that you can. Something like basketball absolutely would help that, or even yoga. Yoga's a lot of breath work and slow meditation. Those things, slowing your mind down, thinking of what you're doing, being able to process a lot of information in a short amount of time. Things like that are gonna supplement. It doesn't have to be a martial art.
Right. So yeah. So even if it's not martial art, you can still supplement your training and complement your training with almost anything. You can take some of your concepts and dive into, like you said, like firearms or what have you, and then use those concepts, bring them into your martial arts. And then we're learning the sword this week, I like to reference how the sword comes from the waist. A lot of techniques come from the waist. Knives come from the waistband, and so do firearms come from the waistband. And just by learning the sword, even though it's not the same thing as a firearm, if you apply the concepts and the principles of weapon retention and drawing and preservation before presentation, stuff like that, now you are going to connect the dots, and we call that transferable methodology, where you can just take one thing from one martial art and put it in the other. But sometimes it takes somebody to make those connections. Otherwise, you see firearms, knife, and sword as completely separate entities or arts. And in reality, I like to say that if you're doing a martial art where you're primarily striking and blocking, they're all roughly the same. You generate hip power the same, you do this the same, you punch the same, but stylistically they look different. So why not be able to study karate and taekwondo, right? Because they're going to stylistically be different. You might get some extra things that you can throw in there on either side. So, Christy, how has martial arts, because you've done yoga first, how has martial arts complemented, or what has been supplemented for your yoga training, if anything? Because I'm sure yoga training definitely goes into martial arts. All right, I could talk all day about that. But how about the opposite? What do you take from martial arts that you've decided to implement in your yoga teachings or training or practice specifically? Or have you just said, you know what, I'm not going to change anything, I'm just going to stick to yoga? That's okay too, right?
It's a really interesting question, because I've definitely thought about it the other way plenty of times. As you said, yoga obviously has things that complement, well, everything obviously, but martial arts specifically, breath work and linking breath with movement, and just being aware of how to move in your body and how to bring awareness into what you're doing as you create shapes with your body, right? How has martial arts influenced yoga? I'm going to be 100% honest with you and say that I do not bring my martial arts into my yoga.
Okay.
But I do bring my martial arts into my running. I do like long distance running, and I would say that training in martial arts, I'm not scared of anything when I run now, because I can get hit in the face and I'm fine. What's going to happen to me while I'm running that hasn't happened to me in martial arts? I could roll my ankle. Okay. I almost broke my ankle doing martial arts, not running, and I rehabilitated it and figured it out. I could fall and get hurt. Okay. I've gotten thrown or fallen tons of times in martial arts.
Roll.
Yeah. So, while maybe for me, it hasn't necessarily crept into yoga, it's definitely crept into the other way that I cross train, which is running. And I think it all blends together and helps you to just understand your body and yourself and your what's important to you in terms of how you use your body and how you create longevity in your body, right? Like, you want to keep your joints healthy and you want to keep your endurance up. And I think that all of it, everything that you do to benefit yourself, and even down to nutrition and breath work and things like that, right? Energy work. It all is that melting pot that blends together.
So let me interject for a second. Just to clarify, and these are kind of things that maybe we can look out for, because just because you haven't implemented martial arts trainings or tactics or techniques or concepts into your yoga, it doesn't mean you won't. So let me just throw some ideas out there. What about, in yoga, there's a lot of transition, right? You're constantly transitioning from one movement to another, from pose to pose, opening your back, doing this, doing that. And while you can do that in the martial arts, has there been any kind of movement that you've done, such as a block or a kata, some sort of a footwork that, maybe even subconsciously, before you sit down, you do like a crescent foot and you do your thing, you know what I mean? Anything like that kind of pop into your mind? And if not, that's okay too. But I would say that, maybe those are things to look out for in the future. You could be doing it subconsciously as well.
Well, there's definitely crossover there, right? Especially in Taekwondo with our traditional stances. Like a front stance in Taekwondo is basically Warrior One, right? So, again, I feel like it's more like the yoga influences the martial arts. I have a very strong front stance because I've been doing Warrior One for so long, right? But, of course, I thought about it in yoga, right? In Warrior One. How do you adjust your weight, right? Like in that posture, because if you were in if you were in front stance for a kata or front stance because you are practicing a technique that starts there, you're thinking about, do I need more weight in my front foot versus my back foot, or should it be totally balanced, right? So like that's something that can be applied to yoga. Going back to what you said about transitions, I do think that in terms of teaching, that there are maybe some things that have crept in, like repetition, right? Like one of the things that I like about some teachers' teaching styles, like yourself, is repeating the instructions multiple times and maybe with a slight change of focus or throwing in just a little something different, but saying the words multiple times, demonstrating the pose or the technique rather multiple times. I think that there's power in that with teaching yoga as well, because sometimes, especially in a more fast-paced class, there's just a lot of, and now we're doing Warrior Two, and now we're moving into Half Moon, and then you're going to come back and do a reverse warrior or whatever, right? Just a quick flowing of transitions between poses. But I do find that sometimes that repetition can be helpful. Just saying it more than once, saying it a different way, offering the pose and then a different alignment cue. So I think that in terms of teaching style, that has crept in for sure.
Gotcha. Thanks. So I did want to talk about methods methods of cross-training and what constitutes cross-training. And, if you do a different martial art, definitely cross-training, right? Doesn't matter if it's karate versus taekwondo or kempo, or if it's a completely different style, totally unrelated to what you're currently learning. If you're learning boxing and you do wrestling, completely unrelated, but again, they can complement each other in some fashion, definitely cross-training. However, your teacher, right, just if you go from a taekwondo school to a taekwondo school and they have the same teacher, doesn't mean that they're going to be the same teacher, meaning your student, your direct teacher, and then your the new teacher, right? So let's say you had your current teacher, taekwondo teacher, had a classmate that he was raised with, and he also has a school 50 miles away, and then you go train with him. I would say that's still cross-training because you're getting different approaches, different style.
Absolutely.
Maybe he's more familiar with different martial arts, and when somebody gathers a bunch of different martial arts and a lot of information and knowledge over the years, and they didn't just practice BJJ, for example, they're a little more well-rounded, then it's going to affect their overall style and approach, right? Their explanations, their understanding of it, it's all going to change. That's why, certain kinds of people just don't understand the basics. And here's an example. Every school in the world says, oh, we teach self-defense. And it's like, no, you don't, right? You teach karate, you teach BJJ, you teach boxing. That's not self-defense, right? Self-defense is life or death. You have a kid in one arm, your wife in the other, and she's carrying a grocery bag, right? And then something happens where a guy is trying to, or two guys are trying to, mug you or tear you down or do something, right? What do? Right? And everybody has an answer with like 5 minutes of prep time, right? But we're not all Batman. So, like everybody has an answer when you can think of it hypothetically, but in real time, when you have no time to think, they don't have a clue, right? And that's what real, true self-defense training is about. It's all about that, right? What do you do when? And there's no second chances. So, finding somebody who teaches stuff like that is really crucial if you ever want to learn like real self-defense. And it's very easy to get what's the word?
Confused.
No, content with your martial arts style from the safety of your dojo. Even if you go hard and you're good, it doesn't matter. Like you go to another dojo, it's easy to be humbled or proven wrong, and say, hey, your martial art isn't as good as you think, because if I just change one aspect of the circumstance, everything you just did is completely null and void. So
Or to put validity to the art, it's the person, the training. They didn't have maybe the greatest habits training that they thought. Maybe they weren't actually doing the blocks as well as they thought. Perhaps they weren't. They got too comfortable. They ended up being comfortable in their dojo, in their space. They didn't have challenges from somebody with a different style, somebody with different background, or just different approach. Sometimes it can be two different schools that are the same style. You're going to experience something totally different. The energy that somebody brings, maybe the discipline and how they just go about classes. I know some classes I've been there where you stand there at attention, you don't say a word, you just wait and you do your thing. And there's other schools where you're all laughing and joking right before you bow in, and then seriousness starts. But if you don't experience other energies from other people outside of your own dojo, you're going to get comfortable, and you're not going to have that confidence when all of a sudden somebody rocks you and you don't have that reaction time because you're not used to it, because Kelly's been going soft on you because her blah blah blah, like you get that comfort, and it's the illusion of comfort and safety in that martial art gets thrown out the window.
So the last thing before we leave is let's just talk about cross training, but through other methods than the actual teachers, because some people don't have the resources, such as somebody nearby, or time or money to go to maybe a whole nother teacher, or the interest for that matter. But they want to train outside your own dojo for whatever reason. So let's talk about YouTube or videos or books, online, education platforms that you can, get my course. All right. So that, I would say, definitely is cross training for sure, especially if it's a different teacher. But I'd like your feedbacks, because I have my own input on this, but I'm curious as to people with lesser experience levels, what your input might be, and do you think that somebody should be going on YouTube or reading books or all that stuff for cross training, and how would that benefit them when they're not working with anybody directly? How is that going to be good or bad or what have you?
I think that, is it ultimately going to be as beneficial as going and cross training in person with other humans? Potentially not, especially because martial arts involves working with different partners, right? Can't do that if you're at home watching a YouTube video or reading a book. You're lacking that energy, that physical contact that's just part of this sport, right? But does that mean that there's nothing to gain and that it doesn't count as cross training? Absolutely not. You can still hear an instructor explain a technique in a way that clicks with you. You can still see it done and pause it, rewind it, watch it again, watch it as many times as you need to, reference it after class if you were like, we were working on this, but it just really wasn't making sense to me. But I know I have this YouTube video saved about the Kimura, for example, since you mentioned it earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that when I watched it, it kind of made sense. So let me go back and reference that again. I mean, I think there's a lot of, pardon me, I think there's a lot of value in that. I also think that being a lifelong student is important no matter what you're doing, right? Reading about things, researching things, keeping your mind on that and fresh and hungry for knowledge. That's an important part of the journey too.
Right. Johnny, have you used anything to supplement books, and have you found them valuable at this point in your training?
Absolutely. Definitely. Even before I got into a dojo, I was reading some books. Really, what got me into it is reading some books about it, and wanting to actually practice it in real life, in real time, experience energy and stuff like that. And it absolutely has helped. Sometimes, you get ahead of yourself almost. You hear words, techniques, definitions, and you may think you understand it, you may think but then all of a sudden, you find a little bit down the road that it was maybe a little bit different than you had read or interpreted or understood. And I think a huge important part of that is what we talked about, is having that foundation. You're building onto what you already have. You should already understand the Kimura if you're looking up Kimuras and then going into the dojo. And I think another important part of that is, bringing those things back to your home dojo or gym and discussing them with your sensei, your master, or whatever.
Yeah, I think that's
your other people.
really crucial.
I don't think doing it by yourself and then just be like, yeah, I got the Kimura because I watched the YouTube 20 times. That's not how it works. You need to bring it back and say, hey, I know, one of the students that we work with, that we always come back, hey, can I try this really quick, or can we explore this really quick, or hey, have you checked this out? And I think that is how you get that well-rounded with supplementing books and videos.
I think the biggest issue with cross training online is you have to already understand, because the person's not there talking to you. You can't ask questions. So when you're reading a book about technique, and you're watching a video, usually they're quick videos, short videos of something, and you don't have full context, and you're only getting that one single-sided view of it sometimes, or quite possibly, you're looking at what I call technique acquisition, and all you're trying to do is say, oh, here's a new technique, I'm going to save this and do this. Oh, here's another technique, right? Next thing you know, you have 50 techniques you can't do, all because you watched videos, but you think you know them, and you think you learned something, but you didn't, because you never actually practiced them. And if you did take it to your dojo and try to practice them, you probably didn't practice them right, because your teacher's probably looking at you going, what are you trying to do? Oh, well, I saw this video and he was doing something, I forget what it's called, in parentheses, Kimura. But he was grabbing, and then next thing you know, the teacher's looking at you all weird, and you're grabbing all wrong, you're not laying over them properly, you're not distributing your weight properly. Everything that the teacher would have told you initially, you would have been able to understand, and you would have been able to ask questions, and he would have been able to fix you in real time. All right, so just the last recap here. Overall, cross training is great. Yes.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yes.
It should be done ideally after you have some sort of foundation, and if you're going to do two at once from the get-go, because technically, we cross-train at my own dojo, right? We do several martial arts, and technically we have a couple different teachers, so you technically get cross-training every single day, but it's within the same realm of martial arts, and they're all very complementary to each other. They all work well with each other, and they're all taught very similarly. So that's another thing. So. Cross-training too soon could be detrimental to you overall, because you haven't really learned to be a student yet.
Absolutely.
And next thing you know, you dropped out of 2 dojos and you wasted a lot of money. Okay, and you have 2 contracts to fulfill. All right, getting bad info from random teachers sometimes is bad, and I'm not saying just because they're doing it different doesn't make it bad, but you might get a technique one day, and it's going to be the worst it'll be somebody who says they know how to do it, and it looks like they know how to do it because you don't know better because you're training too soon. And next thing you know, you try it and you break somebody's arm, or you do this, you do that, all because you got bad info or info that wasn't relevant to your current understanding of it. And that's really important. So
YouTube jitsu, yeah.
yeah, exactly. So and I'm guilty. I have acquired many techniques and ideas and concepts that I've incorporated in my own training at some point in time. But that's not a majority of my training. A majority of my training has been in person with actual instructors, mainly my own. So you're talking, just a few % of things that I wouldn't even be able to necessarily. If there's a few things I can tell you, I learned this from a YouTube video, right? And I've applied it and it works and I like it and it makes sense because it's coming from people that dedicate their lives to that specific type of technique. So I'm taking their information instead of from somebody else. So, and I try it out for myself and I do what works for me. So
on top of your years and years of training.
Right.
So that's
right.
Yeah.
So I feel as though the more training you have in your foundational martial art, you get to see other people doing martial arts also, and you can figure out what is best for you. So if you do a martial art that's punching and kicking and blocking like Kempo or Karate, Taekwondo, and then you go and you learn something else that's similar, you'll be able to find, you don't have to change your current style. You just have to take some of their stuff and say, I like that, or I find that to be useful. How do I incorporate that or integrate it into my own style? Because ultimately the goal of martial arts is for everybody to have their own style. You shouldn't look like your teacher. You shouldn't do everything the same way your teacher does. Otherwise, you're not really doing yourself good service, but you're also not evolving the martial art. And cross-training does that. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Again, Oneway Retreat, Vermont, July 2027. Next year, you can go on oneway.com and learn more about that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
If you enjoyed that podcast, please consider liking and subscribing to our YouTube channel, as well as hitting the notification bell.